Hello and welcome to Infrastructure Matters, the podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic world of infrastructure, asset management and public works. I'm your host, David Jenkins, Chief Executive of IPWEA. In today's episode, we're joined by Clare Tubolets, CEO of SmartCrete CRC, for a powerful conversation on decarbonising concrete and why procurement systems, not technology, may be our biggest barrier to net zero. Clare shares insights into sustainable concrete innovation, market reform, regulatory challenges, and how local governments can drive real change through their purchasing decisions. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for a thought-provoking discussion on systems, accountability, and the future of low-carbon infrastructure. So welcome to Infrastructure Matters. I'm delighted today that I've got Clare Tubolets with me. And Clare, you are the proud owner, I think, probably the sixth person of our Infrastructure Matters mug.
Thank you so much. It's such an honour.
Like it?
I really do like it. Yes, thank you.
Well, we'll have some photos up and you can see them. So, very expensive. You can't buy them on eBay. So you're very lucky. Now, Clare, you are the SmartCrete CRC. And we've just made a conversation just now over lunch. And maybe you could just tell our audience just the high level.
Yeah.
SmartCrete CRC, what do you do?
Yeah, what do we do? So we are a cooperative research centre. That's a program that exists under the Department of Industry and the federal government. And, if we look at what is CRC first, because that's probably a good place to start.
Yep.
Australia has really fantastic research. We do incredibly high quality research in Australia. Our universities are ranked amongst the top in the world. And in terms of our publications, we're generally ranked anywhere from sort of 7th to 10th globally. So we do really fantastic research. What we don't do so well is actually create economic value out of that research. So the translation of that research is kind of on the lower side. And there are lots of different world rankings that you can look at there. I think one that, frightens a lot of people is the Harvard Economic Atlas of economic complexity, where Australia, I think, ranks at about 108 globally at the moment in terms of, the diversity and complexity of our economy. And so that would suggest that all of those innovations that are coming out of universities aren't necessarily driving business change.
So how do CRCs come about, and then specifically, what are the objectives of SmartCrete CRC? What are your clear? So if you're talking to your team, what are the 3-4 things that you're looking to achieve?
Yeah, so a CRC comes about when a group of industry participants come together and say, we could really benefit from university research in a particular area. So for SmartCrete CRC, the driving objective was decarbonisation and also productivity in the cement and concrete sector. And so a whole range of different participants across the built environment came together and SmartCrete CRC was formed. It's a 7-year program and sadly we are almost at the end, or sadly not sadly, we've done really fantastic things over our lifespan. But so we have Commonwealth funding that we invest in projects that are driven by industry. So they set the objectives, they tell us what the outcomes need to be, but they're delivered by a group of Australian universities. So we've got 11 universities in our program. And we do work really across the sustainability space for cement and concrete. So we have 3 programs of work. The first one is looking at the actual concrete mix itself. We call it sustainable concrete. And that's thinking about low carbon cements or cement alternatives, really anything that we can do to drive down the embodied carbon in fresh concrete. The second one we call engineered solutions, and that's thinking about how do we use concrete within design and engineering. So optimizing efficient use of materials or even performance of materials in different infrastructure classes. And then finally, we have a program which we call asset management. So that's thinking about how do we extend the life of existing concrete assets? Because if we don't need to replace them as frequently, then obviously that's also a saving when it comes to a sustainability perspective. So we've done a huge range of projects. Our portfolio at the moment has more than 60 individual projects running across all of those 3 programs. Yeah. We're doing things from 3D concrete printing and how that can enhance the build time and performance of residential infrastructure, through to sensing and monitoring in our sewer infrastructure, through to novel uses of concrete additives like graphene oxide to again drive down the cement material that's used in concrete. So It's a really diverse portfolio and some really cool project outcomes that are coming out of it.
And look, most of our members are local government engineers, directors of infrastructure assets, responsible for the building and the maintaining of local community infrastructure. How can they access this research? And I guess there's one thing knowing about what's out there. There's another thing then being able to actually deliver it on the ground, go through a procurement process, look at new alternative ways of sustainable concrete, for example. So how do you sort of draw the line then between what you're doing here and how this is going to benefit the practitioner over there?
Yeah, it's a really, really challenging question. And it's definitely one of the things that we're required to think about as a CRC is what do those knowledge transfer processes look like? But I actually think that you've hit a real nub in terms of one of the challenges that we have to decarbonising our sector is that there is actually so much information out there. So, how does someone who's potentially time poor, really with a project's focus, get across all of the information that they need to be able to make good, sustainable procurement decisions at that project level? That's a really complex question. So what I can start with, what do we do, but then maybe we could have a broader conversation about what do we still need to do.
Yep.
So at SmartCrete CRC, we promote the outcomes of all of our projects. So everything is, it's publicly funded. So all of that information is made available publicly. So as outcomes of projects are available, we put them up on our website. We run communities of practice. We try to disseminate that knowledge as much as possible. But then we also really try to find knowledge champions. So to call out one in particular, we've had a really great relationship with Transport for New South Wales, who are looking at how they can take the outcomes from some of our projects and turn them into handbooks and guidelines and things that can actually be used on the job inside their design and procurement processes to actually enhance the way that they're selecting materials.
So and the communication side, so you said the communities of practice, champions. Have you done anything at local government level?
Yeah, we've had some really great partnerships with local governments actually. In fact, a lot of the work that we do, particularly around novel materials, requires field testing. So we've had some really fantastic partnerships with local governments like the Hunter LLC, various others, to actually trial some of these materials. That's been great. I think one of the challenges that we find is that because there are so many local councils, I think 467. It's a big, complex environment to try to communicate with all local councils. Again, I know we're sort of New South Wales centric here at the moment, and I'm going to give you another New South Wales example. But one of the things that I'm really inspired by at the moment is the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, Water. They've been doing a project looking at how they can create some web-based resources for the local councils in New South Wales to create a bit of a platform so that everyone has access to the same resources. So I think that's going to be a really interesting project that potentially will enhance access to information for local councils. But again, I think we come back to this problem of the information that's available is complex. There's so much of it available. It's really difficult for people to make decisions on the ground. So when we're thinking about how we achieve decarbonisation as a nation and some of the big meaty problems that we still have to tackle, this is one of the ones that we're going to have to do a lot of thinking around. Maybe what we need to be thinking is not so much the responsibility of the individual to make the right decisions, but how do we have systems that actually make it either easy to choose the right materials or obvious? The system just kind of works for itself rather than relying on an individual engineer to be across all of the kind of materials innovation, not just in concrete, but in all materials.
But isn't systems one of the big problems? And we think about, we talk about procurement process. So even if you're looking at new, innovative, in inverted commas, sustainable products in your space, concrete, even if you want to do that, does the procurement process, does that allow it? Does it incentivize it? Is that the real problem?
That I would argue, yes, that's the real problem. So in practice, delivering a program which is highly technical. So, the research that we do at SmartCrete CRC is about the performance of materials. It's about the, new technologies, new solutions and how they work in practice. And, there's a big question about how you go from, say, lab scale to commercial scale and the challenges involved there. But actually the biggest problems that we found in delivering a technical research program haven't been about technical performance at all. They've been exactly this. So they're market regulatory skills-based barriers. It's things like the procurement environment, which you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But then it's also, the risk sharing frameworks. When we think about the fact that if a material is not specified within a state-based procurement framework or the National Construction Code or standards, then you're going to need a performance-based solution, which means you're going to have an engineer that takes the responsibility of that decision on their own shoulders. So, if you're thinking about a new material, do you want to be the first one to specify for that material? Probably not. So, it's kind of a system which is stacked against innovation, and it really pushes for status quo maintenance because, we want to make sure that our infrastructure is resilient, that it lasts, So you don't necessarily want to be the one pushing for innovative solutions with an unknown outcome. So if we really, really want to drive innovation and a decarbonisation agenda for this sector, we're going to need to find ways of sharing risk. We're going to need to find ways of creating, commercial incentives, perhaps penalties as well. We're going to need a system which actually encourages shared accountability across what is actually a very complex supply chain. And those are really difficult questions. As part of our program at SmartCrete, we really love to get people into a room, generally people that represent all sorts of different opinions across a complex supply chain, and ask them questions about, okay, if we've got this big goal, what are the things that we actually have to address, in order to get there? And I can tell you that having, 20 to 40 engineers in a room, we can happily talk for days about the, structural performance of a low carbon concrete that has, a particular blend of cementitious materials. That is something that we're very comfortable doing in our sector. As soon as you throw in, how do we harmonise state-based procurement, or how do we address, knowledge asymmetry and skills issues, that's when it becomes really difficult, and we don't necessarily, they're the really hard questions.
So does part of your remit, is this the type of advice you're providing back to government? You're saying, look, yeah, we can provide all this research around new solutions, products, etc. But the real problem we have here is around the procurement process, the systems, the regulatory frameworks, etc. Yeah. And do you give that advice, and where does that go?
Yeah. Actually, you've hit the nail completely on the head. That's exactly what we're doing right now.
Yep.
So as a CRC, we have a finite life. So I mentioned before, SmartCrete is only 7 years, and we're rapidly coming to the end of that life. So 30th of June 2027 is our last day in operation. We'll be wrapping up all the projects. We'll be hopefully having a really fantastic event to celebrate all the success of those projects. But after that, that's it. The SmartCrete program is done. So we do have an opportunity to go back to the government and report on our findings. And as part of that, we have decided that we're going to go to government to promote a new program, a new systems-based innovation program to help address some of those major market and regulatory barriers to decarbonisation. There's no set process. So, it's not as easy as sort of saying, oh, well, here's stage 2 of a CRC. And in fact, what we're proposing is quite different to a CRC in that we think that the way to solve these big, meaty challenges is not through a university-based research program, but actually through a cooperative full supply chain innovation program that actually allows everyone to come to the table and play their part in solving some of those meaty challenges. So yeah, it's not a sure thing, but we're absolutely lobbying to government at the moment that we don't need to keep doing this technical research. It's useful and it definitely has a role to play, but actually if we're completely flippant in our conversation right now, we have all the technology that we need to decarbonise concrete right now. The problem is that we don't have market pathways to adopt those technical solutions. And that might be, because the capital cost of bringing that technology in at scale is too high. Great. Well, if that's the problem, then we have pathways to address that. It might be because there are specific regulatory barriers, either in legislation or in some of our regulatory frameworks like standards and National Construction Code. Again, we have pathways to address that. It might be just around, as you said before, motivation, knowledge, awareness. And again, there are systems to address that. But because it's this kind of very complex environment where all of those things are a problem, it's really hard to address them sort of one by one. We need to address them all at the same time.
Because how are you going to get, or how would you propose a solution that addresses that issue? You've got the academics on one hand, right, who they don't have to go and actually practically go and deliver the solution. And then you've got the practitioners who are sitting there going, well, that's all well and good from an academic point of view, but actually, there's a whole lot of other things I need to consider from a practitioner point of view. And then practitioners are time poor typically, there's a lot of other things, competing priorities, etc. How do you propose a solution which you're saying the whole supply chain? So you actually get, this is a bigger question than just concrete, but how you get the academic community working closely with the practitioner community. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I mean, it's, again, the premise behind a CRC is that's what we should be doing, is finding ways to get universities and industry working really well together. I think in this case, it's probably about using research where it makes sense to use it, but not that's not the whole solution. For example, if we wanted to tackle the question of incentives and how do we actually drive the market to make more sustainable procurement decisions, a really low-hanging fruit might actually be working with the Australian Carbon Credit Unit Scheme, which exists in the Department of Climate Change, and working on creating projects that specifically respond to, embodied carbon reduction in new build. At the moment, that doesn't exist as a process. Most of the projects that are structured under the ACU program relate to agriculture or kind of, greenfield forestry, that sort of area. But we have pretty good science right now on what reduction of embodied carbon looks like in good design. If you look at an existing system like the Green Star rating tool, which is delivered by the Green Building Council of Australia, they already have methodology which looks at, a baseline proposed build, all of the sustainability related modifications that you plan to make to that build and what the carbon saving would be. And then that's used to give a Green Star rating to that build, because you can say, we've had this reduction in embodied carbon. They also do a lot in terms of the operational carbon of buildings as well. But, if we're thinking about upfront embodied carbon, there's good systems in place already. So if we're thinking about market systems that could actually incentivize that purchasing behaviour and create sustainable-led markets, maybe the ACU system could be looking to some of that methodology which is created by the Green Building Council, delivered through the Green Star system, and thinking about using that to actually assign Australian carbon credit units, which have a real monetary value to low-carbon purchasing decisions. Maybe that could create a new market environment. So I think what we need to be thinking of is not necessarily what are the technologies that are going to drive us towards decarbonisation for this sector, but what are the market systems that we need to fast track the scale of those technologies as they become available.
Okay. I mean, when we talk about sustainable world, it's more than just concrete, right? And I know that's your world, but it's there's different types of infrastructure. We've done some work on green infrastructure, use of natural asset solutions. It's a bigger play than just concrete and sustainable concrete. What's your view on all that? And do you think that all the different players are working together as they should to try and I'm not trying to set you up here, Claire. I'm just trying, but I mean, these are the difficult questions. I mean, do you have a sort of view on that? Because, my concern is to use your words around systems, when we talk about a systems approach to things, a system solution, it's talking about the bigger picture and how do all these different things join up to create, in this circumstance, a more sustainable world.
Absolutely.
You think we can do that better?
Yeah.
That's a leading question, isn't it?
Absolutely, we can do that better. Yes. And to answer your difficult question, no, we're not currently working well together as a built environment sector. So I guess, the easy way to respond to this could be that there's some kind of tension between the different materials suppliers. In my experience, that's not the case. I don't see any kind of, big timber fighting against big concrete. There's space in this environment for all of the materials suppliers, and I think they actually all play very different roles. Particularly when it looks to, you look at the way that materials perform. Concrete is very unique in that it's liquid rock, basically. So, it's going to have properties that the other materials don't have. But we absolutely need to be thinking of hybrid solutions, and material substitution, where that makes sense, is an important part of that. But I think the idea that there's potentially, conflicting objectives or principles in different sectors, I just haven't seen that to be the case. The ABS is currently predicting that by 2030 we might have a population of around 3 million people. we're already facing massive infrastructure pressure at the moment in terms of meeting the demands of our current population. So the need for new infrastructure over the next few years is still very high. And so there's a role for all materials to play there in meeting those infrastructure demands.
Is it the need for new infrastructure, or is it redeveloping some of the stuff that we already have, or looking after better what we currently have?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of it as well. But I mean, functionally, we will need new infrastructure as well. We're going to need new hospitals, new airports, new schools. I keep revealing my cards that we're sitting here in Sydney, and I certainly want to take a national approach to this. But, when you look at the housing crisis, for example, it's very clear immediately around us in the Greater Sydney area, there just are not enough properties available for people who need to be close to the city. And so that has to be addressed in some way. And it might be about repurposing. That's definitely part of it. Certainly if we're thinking about the circular economy, repurposing is a really important component. And in fact, again, Sydney-centric, but we have an incredible example of that right here in Circular Quay, in Quay Quarter Tower. Mm-hmm. So Quay Quarter Tower is just globally renowned as an incredible engineering innovation. It's a new technology which has been kind of dubbed re-lifing. So they took the old AMP building, which I believe was 1976, 78 construction. So it had reached the end of its effective design life, and so could have very easily been removed and then rebuilt. But instead, they looked for many reasons, but they looked at how could they actually reskin that existing building. So the process was that they took off all of the outer facing of that old building. They retained all of the floor structures, the lift well, the stairs, and they built around it. So they expanded the footprint by about a third. They were able to save a huge amount of concrete in terms of, re-skinning that building, and they've given it a completely new life. So new 50 years worth of design life, much bigger footprint, and a really beautiful building for Sydney CBD. So there are really exciting opportunities that we can think about there. But to that original question of how do we get the materials to work well together, I think we do need to find ways to work as a built environment to address these issues, to look for those opportunities for material substitution. I think there's still going to be such a huge demand for concrete into the future that there's no question that we could entirely move away from that as a material. In fact, there have been some studies at a global level that have looked at the demand for new infrastructure materials and the availability of forests to supply that from a timber perspective. And I mean, it's just a drop in the ocean in terms of the amount of material that would be available. So we actually functionally can't substitute concrete as a material. But the other side of it is to not necessarily vilify concrete as a material. It's definitely one of the major issues that we have globally in terms of decarbonisation and achieving net zero. There are some estimates that concrete could be upwards of 6% of global emissions. So it's a huge, huge challenge for us. But when you look at it at the material level, it's estimated to only be about 250 to sort of 500 kilograms of carbon emitted for every tonne of concrete produced. So when you compare that with materials like steel, for example, which could be sort of a tonne for tonne of carbon emitted per tonne of material produced, it's actually on the lower side. The challenge is more the volume of material that we use. So in Australia, we use about 30 million tonnes of concrete per year. And so that's really where the challenge comes from, is we just use so much of it. But yeah, there's many different pathways to achieve decarbonisation. I would argue that we know many of the ways to significantly lower the carbon in concrete right now, if we could just find ways to create market structures that actually allow us to adopt those materials.
Going back to some comments you made earlier about linking up the academic side with the practitioner side, is there anywhere around the world that you sort of looked that there's examples where that's really been successful? So when let's take SmartCrete, concrete sustainable solutions. As you say, this is the global thing. How have they managed to link the two to sort of get better outcomes? Has there been any examples that you know of?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good examples around the world. So the World Innovation Policy Organisation has a ranking of countries in terms of how well they do industry research collaboration. And they, in their rankings, the top 10 countries have been the same for about the last 15 to 20 years. And they're all countries that you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear are at the top of the list. So many of the Northern European countries, for example, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Japan, and the US. And so, if
the US?
Yeah, the US is actually quite good in terms of industry research collaboration. Okay. So in fact, the backstory of Silicon Valley is actually that it was founded around Stanford University, and that Stanford is just so great at spinning out these companies and creating a really solid startup community that it kind of spun into this, very exciting IT world that we know it as today. So there's a lot that we can learn from the US in terms of the way that they manage venture capital. Obviously, there's going to be a conversation there about volume. Obviously they have many more people and more access to capital than we have in Australia. And, by nature, having a much larger country also means that you get more diversity and economic complexity, which can be a challenge to achieve in a country like Australia, where we only have, 27 million odd people. And we also have the challenges of geography and, if we look specifically at concrete and we think about one of the opportunities being to supplement cement with another material. Many of those materials are, coming from certainly coal-fired power stations, and so they are geographically located in certain places. And then the new world of supplementary cementitious materials might be coming out of the mining sector and tailings from different mining activities. Most of that obviously occurring on the West Coast, and a lot of the construction occurs on the East Coast. And so, we have different challenges that the US perhaps isn't dealing with. But in terms of industry research collaboration, they've got this real respect at a business level for the research that's done in universities. I think in the US, from what I can see based on the research, a PhD is something that is, again, very respected in industry. You're seen as someone who is an expert and can contribute. Whereas if I could make some personal comments, from what I see here in Australia, I think a PhD can almost be a career limiting decision in that, many of those people are then seen to be too detailed, too focused on one particular area, and perhaps don't have as much, other experience that might contribute to their employability, it's really challenging. Under the World Innovation Policy Organisation rankings on industry research collaboration, one of the metrics that they track is in that country's stock exchange, so the ASX for us, for example, in the top 100 companies on that stock exchange, how many of those companies have an executive level scientist, and let's say engineer as well, because obviously that's the same classification. So how many of them have an executive level PhD? In Germany, the last time this data came out, it was 100 out of 100. In Australia, it was 3. So we have a very different ranking here in Australia, a very different respect for research, for university experience. Maybe fundamentally that comes down to culture. Maybe it comes down to incentives. I think it's a really complex question that we haven't nailed.
If I'm a practitioner and I'm interested in some of the research that's going to come out of SmartCrete as you're beginning to sort of in your last year, and you said you're going to be publishing some more guidelines, research documentation, where can I get access to that?
Right now on our website, so smartcretecrc.com.au, we publish outcomes of all of our projects there. I'd encourage everyone to come along to our communities of practice. Once a month, we showcase 2 of our projects. So they come around pretty frequently. We always put them on at lunchtime to make them a bit easier to consume. But generally a great way to be able to hear directly from the research participant and the industry participant and ask questions. And then, again, we're really looking for ways to disseminate this knowledge. So if there are people listening who are thinking, gosh, I'd love to know more about this particular part of low carbon concrete, we'd love to talk to you. If you see an opportunity to create a specific handbook or guideline or, some kind of knowledge repository, we would really love to work with you over the next year before we close to find a really safe home for all of the outputs from our program.
Great. And have you always been interested in concrete?
No, I'm a newbie to concrete, actually.
Do you love concrete now?
I love concrete. I like to tell people that I have a cold, hard concrete heart. Yep, absolutely love it. I've been here for about 4 years. So, absolutely love it.
And what's next for you, Claire?
I don't know. That's a really hard question.
Well, we don't give easy questions.
Yeah, I know. That's probably the hardest one you've given me. So I mentioned before, we're lobbying to the federal government at the moment to create a systems-based innovation program to address the major market regulatory and skills-based barriers to decarbonisation. I would very much love to run that program for the government, for Australia. You know, I think it could actually put Australia in an incredibly leading position when it comes to net zero strategies. I think if we could get this up successfully, it would set us apart. No other country, as far as I can see, is addressing those systemic barriers. Everyone's really focused on technical pathways to decarbonisation. So this could make us a leader in net zero. So I'm pretty excited about it. But it does require the government to agree with the proposal and put a bit of cash behind it. So yeah, I'm putting all my eggs in that basket at the moment.
And look, I'll give you the final word. I don't always do that. I'll give you the final word. So if there's anything you'd like to say to local government, you know, we've got our listeners here. Anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, well, local government has so much power in terms of setting the market environment. So many of our material suppliers are looking to local governments as their major clients to understand what the future products need to be. So yeah, I would just encourage everyone online to really think about the power that they have in driving market change. If you start asking for low carbon solutions, the material suppliers are ready to supply them. So I would encourage everyone to ask the question.
That's a great message. That's great. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
I think I've learned more about concrete over the last hour and a half than I ever thought was possible. But your enthusiasm and your passion for the subject comes through very strongly, and it's been an absolute delight. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And enjoy your Infrastructure Matters mug.
Thank you so much.
Don't sell it on eBay.
I won't.
All right.
Thanks,
thank you.
David.
And that wraps up another episode of Infrastructure Matters. A big thank you to Clare Tubolets for sharing her insights into the systemic barriers shaping low-carbon infrastructure in Australia. If today's conversation sparked new thinking, we'd love to hear from you. Jump into the Spotify poll and tell us what you believe is the biggest barrier to adopting low-carbon materials in your organisation. Your feedback helps shape future conversations. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review Infrastructure Matters on your preferred platform, and follow us on LinkedIn for updates and insights. I'm David Jenkins, signing off, reminding you that in the realm of infrastructure, every detail matters.